What are we going to do with all this? It's all going to get lost. Right? What are we going to do with it?
Put it in the Talmud.
Ah, thank you. Close. So we put it in something called the Mishnah. We're going to read some Talmud a little bit later. The Mishnah. Okay? So the Mishnah was written by, or put together by a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And he writes down every law that he can think of. So if I say to you, at Congregation Tiferet Israel, do we stand for the Shema or do we sit for the Shema? Some congregations stand, some congregations sit. So how are we supposed to, by the way, Jews argue about everything you can think of. So all of a sudden, different rabbis have different recollections or specifics. It says, put a mezuzah on your door. Okay, now hold it. I have no idea what a mezuzah is. I mean, I know what one is because I've seen them on the wall. But if somebody said to you, put a mezuzah on the door, what's a mezuzah, right? What goes inside of it? What shouldn't go inside of it? Which way do we hang it? Well, Rabbi so-and-so says we should hang it this way. And Rabbi so-and-so says we should hang it that way. So what's the compromise?
Straight up.
No, we do it this way. This is all stuff. So this is all stuff that the Mishnah, because the Jews can't agree on anything, that even if we wrote it down, this was all floating oral stuff, but we didn't have a temple to hang out with. If we lost our temple, God forbid, or all the synagogues were torn down, how would we convene aside from our houses? So they said, we've got to write this down. How did they do that Friday night service at Tiferet Israel? You know, when they asked for the people to stand up and tell their stories. Now, was it after the Aleinu or was it before the Aleinu? I don't know. And you should always ask somebody first before you make them stand up, because otherwise it would cause embarrassment to that person. Or maybe it's too early after somebody's dead. Okay, so all of a sudden we need a little bit of extra commentary. In the year approximately 300, the Talmud is written. The Talmud takes the Mishnah. The Talmud takes the Mishnah and adds a whole bunch of discussion to it. And this original Palestinian or Jerusalem Talmud was written in a rush because everybody was afraid with the Romans there and everybody else. We'd all get wiped out as a people. Okay, so they wrote down all of these discussions in the Talmud. And later on, between 400 and 700 CE, when we had a little bit more time to think, the rabbis of Babylon wrote what we call the Babylonian Talmud. So every time someone says the Talmud says, what they're actually referring to is the Babylonian Talmud. And we are going to be studying extensively from the Talmud, readings of kindness, readings of how you can be the best Jew that you can be. And we're going to read something a little bit later today. That is basically the tradition. I wanted to give you just some of the major expressions that we're going to be using. Mishnah means the law, as recorded 1,800 years ago. The Talmud, or the Gemara, another word, is the discussion around the Mishnah. Midrash means stuff that the rabbis make up that sounds neat. Sorry.
And what was it that Ezra brought back from Persia?
Ezra brought back the first hard copy of the Torah.
Of the Torah.
The Torah.
Right.
The Torah.
The Torah.
Okay? So remember, always we have two versions of Torah. We have the Torah and we have Torah. Okay? The Torah, and I'm going to argue, and this is my drash, that each one of us has. My Torah may be, I'm just going to use an example. Chris's Torah is very, very strong on the environmental management of this sacred earth that was given to Adam. A little bit more than some other people, right? We have different ways of, and each one of us has an interesting way of looking at Torah. Yeah, sorry.
You said that the temple was destroyed, and the fault wasn't the Romans that destroyed it. You said it was the Jews who were not getting along with each other.
Because the Jews didn't get along, there's a story about how the guy at the wedding goes and tries to put poison in the ear of the Caesar, and because the he goes to Caesar and says, "Bring your animal to the temple to be sacrificed," but the Caesar's animal has a perfect imperfection. We're not supposed to do imperfections. He brings the animal. We'll call race. It's a whole complicated thing. Because of that, we did not warrant to have a temple. In other words, we drushed it. We added a moral to it. Senseless hatred amongst Jews, say the rabbis, caused the destruction of the temple.
Well, what I'm thinking is, then you said that Jews always argue. That's one of the best things about the tradition, in that we can get together and think about what works.
Just watching time.
But isn't that the very thing that tradition leads to our own destruction?
Mm-hmm.
So, I have a wonderful friend, Ari Drelich. He is the Chabad rabbi of Edmonton, Canada. He and I, late at night, when Patty was working night shift, he and I would argue because I'd see him setting up his chairs. He lived about 100 yards from my house. And we would argue till we were blue in the mouth about whether women should be involved more in services. I took the position, you may guess, that women should. He said, no way. And we looked at and we spat at each other until we were blue. And then I said, I got to go home right now. He said, wow, that was great. And we hugged and we high-fived. No. That is respectful argument. You're not supposed to study the Torah on your own. Right? Your Christian friends may say, let's study the Bible. Right? I'm reading my Bible. Asur, not allowed. Especially children are not allowed to read the Bible on their own. You must either read it with a teacher or in a classroom or somebody that understands it a little bit better. Why?
They can make
because we end up having people interpreting in very, very odd ways. Rick Sandor. Okay. In other words, people think that they see something, but they don't. We're supposed to look at things 70 different ways. There are 70 faces to the Torah. Turn it around, from the left, from the right, feminist, anti-feminist, fundamentalist. Some like the structure, others like the spirit. Kabbalah, tradition, Sephardic, Orthodox, fantastic. But it always has to be done within a context of respect. That is why when Baruch Goldstein shot Yitzhak Rabin, it sent shockwaves across the Jewish world, because the Knesset in Israel is the biggest machloket place in the world. People are just screaming and yelling and insulting and spit. But at the end of the day, you know what? It's not like life and death personal. We don't kill infidels. So, when the hatred becomes belligerent and senseless, the rabbis teach us a lesson. It's just a lesson. It's a story in the Talmud. I'm not even sure if it happened, but they're trying to teach us from time to time that it should never get personal, because when it gets personal, then God leaves this place and the Romans come and wipe us out. Yeah.
I just want to get a little perspective of 4 to 700. 700 is when the Islamic, the Quran basically is started. Is
probably coincidental.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Why do you think it's coincidental?
Whatever it was, the Talmud was basically sealed. You know what? It probably. You know what?
I think the Quran is like 700.
Do you know what? Do you know what? You may be right that the study halls of Babylon maybe didn't have the flexibility and the freedom to be able to continue to evolve the Talmud as possible.
It hadn't spread to the area that's now Iraq.
So let's
confined to Saudi Arabia.
All right, so let's take a huge jump. I wanted to give you a history of some of the terms. The history, very briefly, of Judaism, that monotheism, right? Monotheism extends through the time of Moses. We seal the deal through the covenant on Mount Sinai. there is a written covenant and then an oral covenant that goes from family to family. How do you do your Passover Seder, right? Every one of you has a different Passover Seder. That's your oral tradition. And somehow all of these oral traditions continue to float down for 1,000 years or 1,500 years until I'm sorry to use the expression, but our ground zero, which was the temple, basically is wiped out. The rabbis say, oh my God, what are we going to do now? The Talmud says, the rabbis are saying, what are we going to do? We don't have any place to bring our sacrifices. We don't have any place to... And the rabbi says, Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, don't worry, even though we don't have animal sacrifices, we have sacrifices of the heart, loving kindness. And that's when we became a people of peace and loving kindness, and our actions became our sacrifice. And that's where we begin the story of mitzvahs and Jewish people, etc. All right, any other questions on this mess before I... Okay. So I want to... so when I say midrash, a midrash will be a story. And there's lots of lovely stories which we will talk about.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It just really hit me that what you just glossed over is huge.
What did I
For me.
Go ahead. What did I just... actually, I'm glossing. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, the animal sacrifice, which involved killing, was totally eradicated, and each person became responsible for that part of themselves. That's huge.
Chazan, if you have a moment, could I just get if there's a Siddur, you know the one just before Kaddish de Rabbanan. I'm going to read you out of the Talmud.
Because there's a story that that we learn in school. It's a short story called The Lottery by Shirley Jackson,
right?
Where once a year in this town they draw lots and one person is stoned. And the whole point of that is that, that we all have that animal nature, and we need to have an expression of that in order to go on. So what you just said is huge. And isn't that what we all struggle with?
We struggle, and that's a nice... By the way, what you're doing is you're doing some drashing, you're doing some metaphorical expansion. I'm going to just go to the absolute... tightness of the facts.
Okay.
People, the Romans, the Greeks, I would imagine, people of the area sacrificed things to God. Right? Now I'm going to go to Christianity. Right? We took an animal and for example, there's still a tradition called Shlakin Kapporas, where you take a chicken around Yom Kippur and you wing it over your head, and it sucks up all of the sins. And you fry it up, or you give it to a...
Cut the chicken's head off.
What's that? And then you take it to somebody because you don't want to give a sinful...
hang it.
Now, the idea of transferring your sins to an animal was very, very heavily practiced. It was the way that the things happen. And when the temple went down, we didn't have a way to do that. I understand the animal instinct, and it's a...
I'm just saying it's a huge shift.
It was an amazing shift.
How did people deal with that?
Well, I'm going to read this to you in a second. We developed what we call the rabbinical age, where rabbis began taking the Torah and the Talmud, and they started to... I'm sorry, I had a couple... and they started to interpret how it is that we could take the Torah and live our everyday life. Quantum shift into the way that Judaism, let's just say 2,000 or 1,500 years ago, no longer was it bring your best stuff to the temple and have it sacrificed, but now personal responsibility for our behavior to live like the Torah.
So that's where charity comes in.
That's where charity officially comes in, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So let me read this to you. Once, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, a very famous rabbi, was walking with his disciple, Rabbi Yehoshua, near Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple. We say this every morning. Rabbi Yehoshua looked at the temple ruins and said, "Alas for us, the place that atoned for the sins of the people Israel through the ritual of animal sacrifice lies in ruins. Then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai spoke to him these words of comfort. Be not grieved, my son. There is another meritorious, equally meritorious way of gaining atonement, even though the temple is destroyed. We can still gain atonement through deeds of loving kindness. For it is written in the Torah, or in the prophets, loving kindness is what I desire, not sacrifice.
Wow.
Okay, let's think about that for a second. It means, and what I want to make a point to you is, God doesn't need your sacrifices. And although I'm going to tell you that I want everybody to
Does
come...
anyone know who wrote that?
Hosea. Isn't that...
Actually, that's also in this week's Torah portion,
Yes.
where Saul, fails to get the kingship because he disobeyed God's commandment that
Right.
he kill off all the, I don't know how to
The
pronounce
Amaleks, yeah.
it, the Amaleks. And instead Saul let the soldiers keep some animals for sacrifice.
Right,
And
that's
Samuel
another... Yeah.
says to Saul, God doesn't want your sacrifices. God
So
wants his laws
this
obeyed.
this side of the spectrum, 70 CE, we're big into animal sacrifices. Somewhere in this period, we become a religion where we read the lessons of the Torah and try to live humble, wonderful lives of mitzvot. Here's where we go. Thought I'd never get here. Okay. So, what is a mitzvah?
A good deed. That's part of it.
A good deed that no one knows about.
Okay.
It's following one of the 621 commandments.
Okay. So when we say, what a mitzvah, he did such a mitzvah. A mitzvah means a commandment. It does not mean now it's come to mean, like what's one of the commandments?
Do
To
good.
do a mitzvah. to do a mitzvah. But actually, the mitzvot, and how we're going to discuss how many they are. Someone went and counted them, and they counted 613. And another time, I'll tell you 613. Some rabbis say 611, some say 615. But somebody just counted, right? So let's think of as many of them as we can. We'll do this another day. But let's pop up some mitzvahs. What's in the Torah? Okay, let's start with the Ten Commandments. Okay, so now we're down to
Honor
6.
your father and mother.
Okay, that's in the Ten Commandments. What?
Steal.
It's in the Ten Commandments. Give me some more.
You have to sacrifice a
Keep the
particular
Sabbath.
part of a ram in order to...
Thank you. So when the temple is rebuilt, we'll call on you. And all right, what are some of the... Eat matzah, right? It says that. You shall teach the words
To your children.
to the children of the story of Passover. You shall tell this to your children. Honor your neighbor as yourself, etc., etc., etc. So there are 365 negative commandments, and I think it's 243 positive commandments. So we'll do this another time. And when you accept the obligation for being a mitzvah person, then you become either a bar mitzvah, which is for a guy, or a bat mitzvah, which means for a woman, for a girl. The reason that in old days that it was 12 for a girl and 13 for a guy is that the strict Talmudic interpretation is the appearance of 2 hairs at a certain intimate part of someone's body. And that would be the official designation of when you move from childhood. No, makes some sense. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere, so that's where they drew it, and we won't get into the specifics. But later on, as we got more into an egalitarian world, when the girls were having their bat mitzvahs 1 year early, and there was all these dances, that were going on 1 year for the girls. So within progressive Judaism, and when I say progressive, that's my term, reform and conservative, then we put everybody together at 13. I want you to go just to your, I believe it's the penultimate
It's
page.
abuse of women right across the line there. I mean, you notice that, right?
What's that?
Girls grow up faster and we're much better than boys, at least a year earlier. And right away, you guys put us all
That'd be weird.
Why don't you include the Reconstructionists in that?
What's that?
Why don't you include Reconstructionists amongst?
So I say 3 plus are 3. Reconstructionist, reform, and renewal. And I'll talk about renewal another day.
So it's conservative plus the 3 are.
3 R's, that's what I call it. Renewal is a newer religion from Rabbi Zalman Schachter. That's why when people say, what kind of shul do you run here? What do we say? We're reconformadox, okay? And now that we've added renewal, which I'll talk about another day, it's basically a 60s religion. It's reconformadoxal. That's and you know what? I'm very, very proud of that. We're the only synagogue like this, probably in the world, that is that denomination right now. All right. So when you accept
With the mother church?
yeah, right. Yeah, this is it. This is it right here.
Mother, you got it right.
Now, I want to, and there's not a translation here, but I want you to actually turn to the last page in your. Here is the ceremony. There is a ceremony attached to becoming a bar or bat mitzvah. And excuse me for those of you who have heard this 20 times, but when we go and we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen, what's the next thing you do? Amen means ditto. Okay, so what's the next thing you do? You inhale it. You basically take it into your body. We're saying a blessing over something. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. What do we do next? Eat the bread. Thank you. Now, when you go up to the Torah and you say these blessings, and unfortunately I photocopied this and it didn't have a translation, but I'm going to translate it for you. And you'll see that on the bottom of your page in English, or in a transliteration, whenever there's a dot under the hey, but it says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Now what did we just say? And by the way, hi, how many people go up to the Torah? And you know what? If I were to pull them aside and say, what did you just say?
They don't know.
Many people don't know, right? And this is why what we're going to do is a little bit more important. When we had a bat mitzvah at the wall, we taught what this means. Baruch atah Adonai means praise are you God. Eloheinu melech haolam, our God, King of the universe. Asher bachar. The word bachar means chose us. Mikol ha'amim, from all the other people. V'natan lanu, and gave us Torato, your Torah, or Baruch atah Adonai, praise are you God. Notein ha-Torah. Notein means gave us the Torah. Thank you. Now what do we do next? We actually read a section of the Torah. Now, the idea of chosenism, just because I don't want to take too much time on this, I am going to argue, I'm the rabbi here, so I can tell you that first of all, the Hebrew language has only a small percentage of words in comparison with English. So, for example, if I say, okay, I'm going to do something. Shalom. What did I just say?
Hello, goodbye, and peace.
What did I just say? You have no idea what I just said, right? I mean, I can sort of say, I'm leaving. You can get an idea, or if I take 2 steps forward, you get an impression that I'm saying hello, right? Or if I see somebody has a tear in their eye, I'm gonna say peace, Or shalom also means full. Shalom, full. So in Hebrew, we have a lot of different meanings for a lot of different words. That's part of our problem. Is that when you study Bible in English, that you are taking somebody's interpretation. I'll give you an example. I just told you there arose a Pharaoh in Egypt that did not know Joseph. The word for know, I don't know if anybody knows in Hebrew, is shelo yada. Shelo yada. I didn't know. But Adam knew yada, Eve. So are we talking about, hi, what's happening on the street? Or was there a new Pharaoh that showed up that didn't have Joseph over for tea or for the Jews? In other words, yada means intimacy. Yada means real intimacy. So what is the Torah telling us? Is that the new Pharaoh was not intimate. Maybe there was an overthrow. That's what a lot of people feel, that there was a changing of the guard or did time pass? Or did the Jews not pay calls to the... In other words, so we have... That's what
we
we
also have meant, because some people interpret no in the Adam and Eve story as sexual relations.
Right.
They could, then he hadn't had.
Who knows? So we don't know. All right, so the word bachar, I'm going to say, makes us unique. A lot of people say bachar means chosen. I'm not going to say that we're better than anybody else. I'm going to say that we have a unique mission. Our mission is to, back to Mount Sinai, our mission is that we are obligated to do mitzvahs, good deeds. We are obligated. Everybody else can do them, but it's not in the Constitution of Christianity, and it's not in the Constitution of Islam. I stand to be corrected.
That's really dangerous.
I stand to be corrected, but you are obliged. And here's the difference. The 3 B's. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that you have to believe in anything. Find it. Doesn't
What about there was only one God?
It says you shall have no other gods but me.
Yeah.
Okay? Don't worship. Don't go to the. Don't go. That's about as close as you get. But it doesn't say.
You have to believe.
I'm saying belief. That's a very personal thing. So what I like to talk about is the 3 B's. Behave, belong, believe. The 3 B's. No one ever said that you have to believe in anything. We received the Torah, and what the Jews said was, we will do, and then we will hear. And I tell the story of my friend in Los Angeles, who is an actor, and he says, Erwin, I've been to 55 synagogues in Los Angeles, and I just haven't found it yet. I said, you know what? Light, he's a single guy, he's my age. Light a Shabbat candle. Volunteer time at the soup kitchen on Friday afternoon and make that your ritual. And after 6 weeks, he called me and said, you know what? I feel it. I feel it. So we're supposed to do first. We're supposed to hang out with other people that do the same thing. And you ever say, I don't feel like coming to shul, or I don't feel like participating in this particular service, but afterwards you say, boy, am I ever glad or I feel it afterwards. So whereas some religions you have to believe first, or you have an epiphany of some sort. I'm being I realize I'm casting a very wide net. But Judaism, there is a bias towards behaving and doing. So we are supposed to do 613 things. Most of them we can't do because there's no temple. You do, you do, you do, you do. When you become a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, you agree to do certain things.
So it's behave.
Belong. This is my thing. I've heard it, and then believe. The 3 B's. But yeah, right. Right. Well, I've heard it before, and it's belong, behave, believe, but I've sort of adapted it. So here's what actually a bat mitzvah is. When you say the blessings over the Torah, you make a public statement in front of the community, in front of your family, in front of future generations, that although my relationship with Israel and Judaism has been important, that somehow by the actual physical public statement and a declaration of public values, that you take on officially the obligations and the mitzvahs of, and I'm going to argue not the Torah, but of Torah. And each one of you, as you progress along this journey, will be able to express who you are as a unique Jew. Rose, you've raised how many children? How many grandchildren and great-grandchildren and, you know?
The rabbis asked how many grandchildren and great-grandchildren you have.
Well, with great-grandchildren and children together, I think I have 14.
14. And by the way, Rose will be doing her bat mitzvah on her 100th birthday in October. I just thought I'd mention that. So, so you know what? Rose, your Torah has been a little different than maybe Abby's or somebody else's Torah. Your Torah is amazing, every one of you. So when we say Asher B'Charbanu, thank you for allowing me to be on this amazing ride of being Jewish, and thank you for making me unique and becoming a member of this unique people. That's how I'm going to interpret the difference between a 13-year-old, we're kind of trying to catch them just before they get out into the world. But you know what? It's a public reflection and a confirmation of what Judaism has meant to me. And what you have the ability to do that once we go through a little bit of study, and you answer questions, and you challenge me, and you tell me I don't buy that, or you're painting too wide a brush. Why is it to this point that women have not been allowed to have bat mitzvahs? And I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to give you the Talmud on why we're allowed to do this. Women are exempt, according to the Talmud, from doing time-bound mitzvot. In other words, if it has a schedule attached to it, then you don't have to do it according to the Talmud as women. What's a time-bound mitzvah? Davening. Right? Men are supposed to, like in Jerusalem, right? Everybody gets up and they go to the wall. I don't see women walking with their taluses and their, if they do, we have this problem. But in ancient times, it was seen as a compassionate way, and I'm not looking for a political feminist commentary, I'm just telling you at the time, it was seen as a compassionate way to say,
Women have responsibilities for family,
cooking,
children,
watching,
and-
look, and let the boys go off to to cinema. But of course they work very hard at their jobs. Time-bound mitzvah, putting on tefillin, putting on a tallis, saying the Shema, things that you're supposed to do at fixed times. Women were exempt. It was a compassionate way of letting women attend to other things. It sort of has gotten, and this is again my drash. It's gotten a little bit out of hand. So that women are now excluded instead of
giving them the privilege of
right.
having other obligations. Now it's become exclusion.
Correct. In 1920, and there used to be a party. It says that you're supposed to teach a child Aleph Beit as soon as they can speak, or as soon as they can read. The Shema as soon as they can speak. And at 13, they become responsible for their own lives, their own mistakes, so to speak, their own mitzvahs. Right? So this is why at 13, and you're supposed to have a party. It says so. You're supposed to have a party. Unfortunately, the party. And we say, whenever we look on the bima and we see the siddur or the kiddush cup or the candles still sitting up on the bima weeks after the bar mitzvah, and they haven't wanted to come back, we know that we've maybe done this not the right way, and we are trying really hard to instill on the kids here that it's the rite of passage. It's making a public statement. I want to do mitzvahs, and it's not just these are not the 10 suggestions. These are the 10 commandments, and we take them seriously, and that you have an obligation to make the world a better place. I want you to go to your second to last page. I'm sorry I'm doing so much talking, but I have to just sort of bring this up to speed a little bit. Does anybody have any questions on what? Oh, by the way, the second blessing is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu. You gave us Torah emet. Anybody speak Yiddish? What's emes?
Truth.
Truth. Interesting that the word truth I'm not very good at Hebrew writing, so sorry. You want to give me I'm not very good at Hebrew writing. I write cursive writing, but my printing is not very good. You gave us the Torah of truth. Aleph is what? Where does that come on the Hebrew alphabet?
First.
Taf comes last. Mem comes in the middle. The word truth actually is, it's a balance between the first letter and the last letter and the middle letter. Isn't it amazing how, and that's why we love Hebrew, and we'll be doing a little bit of Hebrew as we go, that it's all the word, and the word sheker, lie, all the letters are at the back end of the alphabet. Thank you for giving us a Torah of truth, which and the Torah endures forever. 3,500 years ago, we're still here, and we're still doing. So what you will be doing is saying a blessing over the Torah publicly, and hopefully saying a few words on what Judaism has been to you. You do not have to do this, but that's traditionally, that's the bare basics of what Judaism is. And your religion and your faith and your observance is a private, personal thing to you. And if you want to make a public statement about all the different journeys that you've been on in your Judaism and where you want to go, do so. If you don't want to make a speech, don't do so. And if you want to come and learn, I hope you learned a little bit of something this morning. I'm giving you a very, very quick, yeah.
Would you translate the rest of the second verse, please?
Asher natan lanu Torat emet. You gave us a Torah of truth. V'chaye olam atah b'tochenu, and it lives forever in eternity. Basically, it's a continuum. It goes forward.
And Baruch atah Adonai Noten, who gave us the
Blessed are you, Adonai, God, Hanotain, the giver, or Notain HaTorah, who gave us the Torah. Now, it does say HaTorah, it does say the Torah, but I'm going to suggest to you that every one of you, your Torah is different. I want to read for you why, and this will be just the second last thing that we'll do. The section of the Talmud which says why women cannot be called to the Torah. Okay? Because obviously the Orthodox have a certain take on this. And why is it that you can't call a woman to the Torah? This is fair one of those. I just want to read it properly. Okay. So I want you to go to, I believe it's the second, let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, the one with the circle. It's the inside back cover. Now, boys, we had a ceremony beginning in the about the 1700s that boys, you would get called to the Torah. I got called when on June the 30th, 1966. I went to my Zayda Shul. I went, and somebody read it for me. They gave me a little schnapps. I went to school at age 13, very happy. That was my bar mitzvah. Now I had a big party, and Peter Orshed and I had our bar mitzvahs exactly on the same weekend, the same day, and that's now in 1922. Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of the Reconstructionist movement. Reconstructionist Judaism believes, by the way, that instead of God being out there, that God is in here. And we can talk about that another time. That when you pray, when you do mitzvahs, kind of like your soul, the God stuff in your kishka basically comes alive. It's a little bit Kabbalistic, and we'll talk. It's more of an internal God as opposed to a transformative.
Transcendental.
Transcendental. Thank you. Let's go to. This is a piece of.
So smart, Mom.
Thank you, Doc.
She comes to synagogue every Saturday. She learns so much. All right. So I want to show you a piece of Talmud. Okay, a little piece of Talmud here. And you see where it says the Gemara through the circle? Everybody got it? So this is the part of the Talmud which deals with Megillah, the laws of what? What do you think? Megillah? Purim. Thank you. Good. All right. It says, by the way, a woman. It's so important that we have a minyan to read the Megillah that a woman can be part of the. It's interesting. Part of the minyan. Okay. Here's what it says. The Gemara The Gemara is another word for Talmud. Quotes a baraisa. A baraisa is a book that didn't quite make it into it's been lost a little bit in time, or it's an obscure text concerning who's those eligible to be called up to read the Torah. Somebody want to read this? Just the English, of course. So somebody want to read this?
The rabbis taught in a
Baraisa.
Read slowly. All Jews count towards the 7 prescribed readers, even a minor and even a woman.
We won't comment on the word even, but okay. Okay.
But
Yeah.
the sages said a woman should not read the Torah for the congregation out of consideration for the dignity of the congregation. I don't understand that.
Okay, can somebody go to the Hebrew? If anybody can read just a little bit, anybody just got a little bit of Hebrew?
I can read, but I don't have my glasses.
Okay, okay, so I want you to read, this is why we got to be careful about our translations. So, right here, there's a very interesting what it says here. Can you read that?
It's a boar.
The one before.
Oh, chivod.
Kavod. Hatzibur. Kavod, when you give somebody kavod, you give somebody respect, right? Hatzibur, respect for the congregation. A woman should not read the Torah out of respect for the congregation. So I'm going to take us back into time travel. Let's go back up. Why would that be? And let's go back 1,500 years. Now, here's, by the way that people used to get called up to the Torah. What do we do now? How many people get called up to the Torah on Shabbos?
7.
7. Okay. So everybody comes up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Everybody says, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim. Asher Bachar Banu, Asher Bachar Banu, Asher Bachar Banu, Asher Bachar Banu, Asher Bachar Banu. 7 times, right? In the old times, the first person would come up, and we would say the opening blessing. And then different people would come up and read from the Torah on your own. And then the 7th person would close with the... So it was like a big bracket. But what happens was, tell me something, how many people, let's just make you guys 1,500 years ago, all right? How many of you could go up and read perfectly a section of the Torah?
Very few.
Very few. So what they did was they hired people like Cantor Gustavo or Torah readers, and so what would happen is that Mr. Marilyn would come up and read a blessing here, and then the cantor would read for them. The cantor would read for them. But before that time, women would come up and read the Torah. How did the men who were gone to war and gone fishing and gone farming or become laborers in construction sites and whatever, they came back because they didn't have law practices and they didn't have careers. What were women doing? They had the time to be able to read the Torah.
Right, because they were so busy raising their children and cooking all the meals that they couldn't, they didn't have the obligation of doing time things, but they had time to learn the Torah. I mean, the whole thing
I am now rushing. I am telling you that the women were so impassioned about studying Torah as part of their day, the way that we would read a book now, or the way that they, in some ways, says the conservative tradition, had exceeded men in their ability to read from the Torah. That is a good thing. That is a superiority of women. It's not a... And
Time frame there?
When?
Shabbos morning.
No.
What
Year. Historical.
I'd say about 1,800 years ago, because we have examples from some of the archaeology that say that women were members of presidents of boards and all that other stuff.
Who taught them? Did men teach them?
I don't know that, but I would say that teachers taught them, or women taught women. I would argue, I don't know who taught them, but I know that the Talmud says, which you just read, they can't read for kavod had tzibur. It was making the men, tzibur is men, like the